Thank you, Reverend Lewis, and good morning, and thank you to the members of the St. George's community for allowing me to speak to you today. In his work, Howard's End, E.M. Forster writes, "Death destroys a man. The idea of death saves him." Let me tell you, as dark as it might seem at first glance, Forster was on to something. There is light in this sentiment as well. So here's my story. I'm going to share with you a story about the worst and best day of my life. It happened last year, so it was not that long ago. December 17th, as Reverend Lewis said, will be the one-year anniversary since it took place, so hooray for anniversaries. I remember much of it like it was just yesterday. Other parts I have no recollection of whatsoever, and that's probably for the best. It was the worst day of my life because I very nearly died. It was the best day of my life because, spoiler alert, I lived. I knew something was amiss as my entire worldview rotated suddenly and quite violently in front of me. That which had been parallel moments earlier shifted 90 degrees counterclockwise instantaneously. This was my own personal movie scene from inception. Compounding my understanding that things were not as they should be was the realization that I could not move my arms. I was falling rapidly, and there was little I could do to prevent my descent from my usual perch atop the hockey bench to the floor below. Luckily, this portion of my nightmare would soon be over, as I lost full consciousness before I ever hit the ground. When I finally awoke, aware of my surroundings, but not fully cognizant, it was nonetheless clear that this nightmare was just beginning. Bloodied, dazed, and racked with nausea and dizziness words can't possibly describe, I began to take stock of the situation. Things were not as they should be. Blood poured from places it should not pour, and I felt as though I was plummeting through the ground below. I could not sit, let alone stand. I had suffered concussions before. I've had my bell rung harder than it should ever be rung. This was clearly different. For the first time in my life, I thought, this is serious. I might not make it through this. Truthfully, that was the last moment I would think about myself for quite some time. Months even. I thought about dying, to be sure, but not because I was afraid of death itself. Life mattered, but it didn't matter solely because of me. My life mattered because of the others in it at that time, and for the person to be in it in the very near future. As my health began to rapidly deteriorate, my thoughts turned outward. I thought first of Mrs. Sorrenzia, who was working off-island at a local day school, and who would need to be informed of the situation. Compounding the difficulty of this inevitable phone call, to be made by someone else at this point, because I had confused my 4-digit passcode with my 10-digit phone number, was the fact that she was 9 months pregnant with our first child. One of the last vivid memories I have while en route to the hospital in the ambulance was telling the emergency medical technician repeatedly and quite emphatically, "My wife is 9 months pregnant. My wife is 9 months pregnant. Help me. My wife is 9 months pregnant." Taken at face value, this was merely a statement of fact. But given the desperation in my voice and the potentially catastrophic outcome of not making it, this was nothing less than a plea for the salvation of my family. At Newport Hospital, my deterioration continued, and I was soon heavily sedated and intubated for a trip to Rhode Island Hospital in Providence. With time of the essence, I was rushed into emergency surgery to repair a skull fracture and subsequent epidural hematoma. Without this surgery, I would have perished. Following surgery, I stabilized, but it was unclear whether I'd make it through the night. And if I did make it through the night, it was unclear what life would be like for me going forward. The life that was seemingly slipping away was not my own. Part of it belonged to my wife and family. Part of it belonged to our unborn son. And part of it belonged to so many of you with me here today. After some uncertain hours for my family and friends, marked by anxious pacing, powerful prayer, a rogue string cheese, a hug by Mr. Weston, which is a true oddity. Hey, Bob. A likely spoiled and thankfully unconsumed hard-boiled egg, and the rapid development of a high-speed taxi service from T.F. Green Airport to Rhode Island Hospital by one of Rhode Island's finest, I wiggled my toes and squeezed hands upon command in the late night hours of December 17th. Not a big deal, but given the circumstances, this was considered miraculous progress. This progress was further assured the following morning when I sought to rip out the myriad of tubes and wires that had helped keep me alive. Apparently, this obstinacy was considered a good sign as well. Then, when asked by the attending nurse if I'd like to take a stroll, really just a few steps to get me out of bed, I sarcastically responded with my innate love of strolls. The sarcasm, too, was a good sign. Stubbornness and sarcasm, two character traits that suggested I was well on my way to recovery. A mere 3 days later, I would be discharged from the intensive care unit at Rhode Island Hospital to our home here on campus. I had made it, but I hadn't made it alone. That's because I don't really exist, and neither do you, at least not in the traditional Western conception of the self. Bear with me here. Although our default way of thinking may be that we're central to the universe and that our personal story is the only story that matters, indeed, even that we're in some way separate from the universe, this experience taught me otherwise in a multitude of ways. The capital T truth is this: we are the sum of the roles we live each day. We are never just one thing. We are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, educators and learners, friends and colleagues. We are humans. And to be fully human means to live with an appreciation of life that allows us to revel in the simple germaneness of existence. But don't be confused. This is not a talk about the meaning of life. That's a question I'm not sure any of us will ever be able to answer. This is, however, a talk about finding meaning in life. In recounting my story, I've often told folks that, in spite of all the things I've discussed here, I didn't really go through this myself. Instead, everyone that surrounded me on that Wednesday last December went through this in ways far more profound than I. Whether we realize this or not, we are in someone else's hands in everything that we do. But how often are we in the hands of people that know and care about us well? Last December, I placed myself in the hands of countless individuals, some of which are here this morning, but many of which were complete strangers at the time. If at any point of that process, one of the individuals faltered in their role, even in the slightest sense, then this might be an entirely different speech. I might not be giving it. I might not be able to comprehend what was being said. I might not even be around to hear it. But I am here, and that is indescribably awesome. It might even be a miracle. And that, friends, is how this thing we call society is supposed to work. Everything we do to one another matters. Even the smallest gestures and actions can have the most intense impact. We ought to do great work because we intrinsically value the merits of excellence, but in doing so, we serve and improve the lives of countless others around us. That itself is the reward. By making me better, I like to think that the doctors and nurses have made the lives of those connected to me better as well. I can do so many things that matter, many of them seemingly small, but that makes them no less impactful. Thanks to their efforts, I could still help Will Busey continue to master the art of the hurdle walk each afternoon this fall during football practice. Shout out to my New England champions in the audience. I can continue to help Joseph Kwan be better at life. Although, spoiler alert, that remains a challenging proposition. I can tell my advisee, Toby Almeida, to tuck in his shirt, or to take off his hat, or to cut his hair. I'm typically not successful in any of these endeavors, but that doesn't mean I stop trying. Because to do so would be to forsake my responsibility as a human being. I can, thanks to a multitude of outrageously fortunate incidents, still pick up the phone to call my mom and tell her I love her. Even at 33, I find this as annoying as I did as a student at 17. But this tiny gesture makes her life and mine better. So call home today. And lastly, thanks to the countless tiny miracles that brought me here today, I get to be a dad, which is unquestionably the most important thing I'll ever do. Less than 2 weeks after my injury, Mrs. Cerenzia, spoiler alert again, gave birth to our son, Benno. Mrs. Sorrenzia, who remains the silent hero of this entire story, ushered me through the early stages of my recovery from a traumatic brain injury while simultaneously caring for a newborn child. Living with me is, surprise, surprise, no easy task even when 100% healthy. So given the circumstances, the fact that I married her and that she hasn't killed me yet suggests an even greater miracle than anything I've mentioned here beforehand. So what's the takeaway from all this? I mentioned earlier that we are constantly in the hands of others in everything that we do. Here at St. George's, you're in the hands of people who know you incredibly well, hands that insist you be as good as you can be and tolerate nothing less, hands that can carry you through the difficult times and high-five you in the best. I know this because I've lived it as a student, and I've lived it as a member of the faculty. I've lived it as a player and as a coach. I've lived it as a resident of Arden and as a dorm parent in Arden. I've lived it through triumph, and I've lived it through tragedy. This is all to say I've lived it in a diversity of roles that allow me to speak with some degree of expertise. Perhaps in no other point of your lives will you be thrust into such a meaningful, caring community of people that simply want you to be your very best. That is an incredibly precious gift. We are never alone. We are the sum of the roles we live each day. Live them well and live them together. Thank you.